The following is part 2 of chapter 6 on creativity. Trait perspective studies of creativity search for certain personal traits or qualities as predictors of creative behaviors. So this means that children are identified as being creative by some measuring device, and measurements are made at different ages. The same children are retested at different times to determine how traits have changed. That would be a longitudinal study, whereas children of different ages who are tested at the same time would be a cross-sectional study. The Torrance tests of creative thinking study charts showed an upward trend and rapid growth during certain age time periods, but then at other age time periods, it showed a sudden decline and then slow recovery. So it's very common for that, for those tests to show creativity as an up and down with the growth and the decline. The process approach and development assumes that creative performance continues through adulthood. So young adults tend to be the most creative. Young adults meaning late 20s, early 30s, up to maybe 40. I believe the textbook said the most creative in some traits was 30 to 35. However, traits such as leadership may be much later in life, whereas creativity in mathematics and in other fields may be around 30 years old. So there are definitely different times where one may peak in creativity, but it seems to be somewhat consistent enough to say that typically someone who is creatively gifted in the arts may peak in their mid-20s. For example, creativity of a child is grounded in experience and spontaneity, whereas creativity of an adult is grounded in knowledge and in persistent searching. So it looks much different when it is a highly creative child versus a highly creative adult who tends to be much more focused. We also tend to have different expectations of a creative child, and how we measure a creative child, it tends to be much more general than when we measure a creative adult, which tends to be quite focused in a certain field. And we just expect that an adult would be much more specific in the way they are creative. And the assumption that creative process is the same at different ages in different fields exists. Although that assumption is undergoing some changes. There is some correlation between one's cultural and historical conditions and creative development. So a creative person grows up in a particular culture and time period. There seem to be times in history where there is much more creativity, such as in Florence, Italy, than other times and other parts of the world. So, for example, 18th century Scotland and 15th century Florence, creative people came from the middle class in good health. They had a certain amount of schooling, and there was urbanization at that time. So there is something to be said for one's nature, how one is raised, the environment in which one is raised, and their creative development. When we're considering creativity in the classroom and how we might teach for creativity, we need to understand that the child is not conditioned and that conditions are established so that the child may be creative. We have great responsibility in helping them to grow in their creativity. So an organized approach is needed to put teaching procedures and materials into a comprehensive framework so that teachers will have a reasonable program. So we look at the Wallace model again, which I will go back to in a moment. The Wallace model is designed so that the program will fit every student. The process may differ from person to person and can be content specific, so it's not comparable across all areas. An argument here is that creativity occurs over a long period of time. So the program describes a process in a short time frame, maybe a day or a week, We'll look at the different stages of the Wallace model again very briefly, and there are techniques for classroom use in each stage of the Wallace model. We know that the first stage in the Wallace model is the preparation stage, and this is the stage that teachers would probably be most likely to spend their time working with students to develop their preparation for creativity. It's something that lends itself more easily, I guess, to education, the ability to sit and prepare for creative thinking. The incubation stage, however, in education can be frustrating for teachers, as we kind of expect students to complete their preparation stage of preparing to solve a problem, and then we expect them to begin solving the problem. We expect them to have ideas, and we feel the pressure to continue to solve a problem. And that incubation stage for students who need time to just let an idea settle before they can solve the problem, it's very challenging for educators and just in education, as we need to complete projects and assign grades and show that we have met standards. So the incubation stage is a challenging one in education and in the classroom, and I think it's something that we don't always realize. We're pushing for an answer immediately instead of giving students that time to let the idea settle and come up with responses. Brainstorming is a big help for this one. Turning inward is a lot about that meditation. And again, that's not something we typically practice in school. It doesn't mean we can't sit quietly and just think and hope that helps. But we see those daydreamers sometimes who are thinking and letting that problem incubate. And we often tell them that they're not doing anything or they're not working. So daydreaming is a little taboo in school, but that can often help with problem solving. So going back to brainstorming, that's a really helpful strategy for students who need that incubation time, students who maybe need a long incubation time, and helping them to more quickly come up with ideas for problem solving. The third stage is the illumination stage, and that's where their problem solving begins to become real. They've figured out the problem, they are close to solving the problem, and it should not take long to get to that verification stage where the product is more realistic. It's closer to showing their peers or experts in the field or whoever that may be, their teachers. And in the verification stage, their problem turned project seems really realistic and close to done. They get that feeling of accomplishment. There is some sort of evaluation of their product, and they have completed that creative product that they have been working towards. As for materials, there are a number of materials that exist to help with creative problem solving and to use it within the classroom to teach creativity to children and adults. There are a number of programs available to students, such as Future Problem Solving and Odyssey of the Mind and CPS for Kids. They are typically present in schools, and they seem to have a great response for creative problem solving. There are also publications that show that children can produce creative products at all levels of schooling. In conclusion, we have a quote from page 259 in the textbook, and the quote is that creativity may be measured by standardized tests, rating scales and checklists, and work samples or products, each of which has advantages and disadvantages, and no one of which alone gives a complete view of the creative process. So again, although we don't have a definition of creativity, we have a variety of definitions to work with, and we have a variety of ways to measure creativity in the classroom and to learn who our highly creative students are. But we really need to use a variety of methods to learn about our students and their creativity. Thank you all for watching, and I hope you enjoyed our slideshow.